Welcome to the deep dive. Right now, people in the absolute prime of their careers, in what should theoretically be their peak earning years, are polling as the most pessimistic generation in the country.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. I mean, they are more pessimistic than boomers and even more pessimistic than millennials.
Right, which makes no sense on paper.
No, it completely upends the traditional narrative of how a career is actually supposed to work. Like, the assumption has always been that you put in your 2 or 3 decades, you hit your stride, consolidate your expertise, and then, you reap the rewards.
But that is not what is actually happening on the ground for a massive chunk of the workforce today.
No, not at all.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand why an entire generation of highly capable professionals is just collectively sighing in frustration, we are going on a deep dive into a really raw, unvarnished reflection from a 53-year-old.
Yeah, someone who recently stepped away from a long advisory career.
Exactly. And their mission for the last few months hasn't been analyzing spreadsheets or building corporate frameworks. It has just been having real, honest conversations with peers, people mostly in that 45 to 60 age range, about what actually comes next.
And we need to be clear about the tone of these conversations right from the outset.
Yeah.
Because this isn't a clinical business study.
Oh, definitely not.
We are leaving the corporate jargon at the door today. There is no talk of synergies or leveraging assets here. The author is explicitly wry and plain-spoken.
I love that.
Yeah, they are naming a quiet crisis happening in the prime of people's careers. And they're doing it entirely in the first person based on, coffee shop confessions and closed-door realities.
I'm really glad you brought up the tone because that's exactly how we are going to treat this. No career camouflage today. We're going to rely heavily on the author's direct quotes to preserve that intimacy for you.
That's the best way to do it.
But I'm struggling with the core paradox here. If these are highly capable people, right? People who have survived and thrived through decades of economic shifts, why are they so pessimistic?
That's a great question.
It just seems completely counterintuitive that they would hit their prime and suddenly lose all their momentum.
Well, the author points to a very specific phenomenon to explain that loss of momentum. And it's the first core thread of these conversations. They call it the illusion of impact.
The illusion of impact.
Yeah. Imagine giving everything you have to an organization, bringing decades of hard-won expertise to the table, and watching the people in the room nod along with your strategy.
Right, they're agreeing with you.
Exactly. But then you watch absolutely zero substantive movement happen afterward.
Oh, man. The author actually specifically mentions being weary of leaders who just want to be told they're pretty instead of actually being challenged to change.
That phrase is so spot on.
It really is. But I'm struggling to understand the actual incentive there. Like, why would an organization pay top dollar for a senior consultant or advisor, bring them into the room, and then actively ignore their advice?
Because it's easier.
That's just burning money. It's like hiring a highly sought-after personal trainer, showing up to the gym, and then insisting on eating a box of donuts while the trainer tries to show you how to do a deadlift. What is the business logic in that?
That is a hilarious image, but it's totally accurate. What's fascinating here is the underlying psychology of modern corporate leadership. The logic isn't about implementing change.
No.
No, it's about optics and risk mitigation. Leaders often bring in senior advisors just to validate the status quo or, to create the appearance of innovation without absorbing the actual friction of changing how things are done.
So they want the credit without the work.
Exactly. The leader gets to say to their board, look, we consulted with the best. But they never actually have to disrupt their own comfortable routines.
So the expert is just there to be an expensive rubber stamp.
Precisely. And for the professional acting as the advisor, the check still clears.
Sure, it's profitable.
Highly profitable. But mechanically, it is so draining. You are an expert who is not being allowed to actually use your expertise to solve the underlying problems.
Which perfectly explains why the author observed people moving on from roles much faster than they used to.
Yeah, they aren't job hopping because they lack focus.
Right. They're leaving because they are hitting the ceiling of impact. They genuinely want to maximize their impact on the companies they serve, and they quickly realize the environment simply will not absorb it.
They are desperately searching for an ecosystem where their expertise will actually alter the trajectory of the business, rather than just, decorating a single meeting room.
But wait, if you are hitting a wall regarding your actual impact, let's look at the financial side for a second.
Okay.
If the company won't fundamentally change, at least you are capturing the value of your own expertise.
Right.
At least the compensation and the titles are reflecting the peak of your career, even if the work itself is frustrating.
You would certainly assume that to be the case. But this brings us to the second broken promise the author uncovers, which is the value gap.
The value gap.
Yes, there is a very real and rapidly growing disconnect between the revenue and growth these professionals generate for a company and the income, title, and recognition they actually receive in return.
The author actually talks about sharing these financial realities with peers, and the response is usually a laugh, but not a happy one.
No, it's that dark, cynical kind of laugh.
Yeah, exactly. And there's this incredible anecdote in the text that highlights just how pervasive this is.
Oh, the LinkedIn post.
Yes. Just 30 minutes after the author put up a post about their career transition, they got a direct message from someone they barely knew.
Wow.
And the message essentially said, I feel the exact same misalignment between my contributions and my opportunities.
In just 30 minutes.
Just 30 minutes. People are sitting at their desks, holding their breath, waiting for someone to acknowledge this reality out loud.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, we really have to analyze the structural mechanics of how value is being extracted right now.
Right.
These are professionals well into their third decade of work. They are doing the managerial heavy lifting.
They're running the place.
Exactly. They are maintaining the client relationships, executing the strategy, holding the operational framework together.
Yeah.
But the corresponding transition in executive compensation and final decision-making authority, it's just being withheld.
So what does this all mean? I have to play devil's advocate for a second here.
Go for it.
Is this just an expectations game? Are people in their late 40s and 50s just demanding things that were never promised to them in the first place? Did they just expect too much from the corporate machine?
The author addresses that directly, and the answer is a resounding no.
Really?
Yeah, they have done the work. They are currently doing the work.
Yeah.
They simply desire the recognition and the openings that historically would have already arrived.
That makes sense.
Right, because in any functioning economic system, there is a natural beneficial transition of power. The older generation steps back from the day-to-day grind. The next generation steps up into senior leadership, and the wealth and authority transfer over.
So the fundamental problem is that the handoff is broken.
Exactly.
It's a failure of corporate succession planning on a massive scale. The generation ahead is keeping the approver roles while keeping the 50-year-olds in the doer roles indefinitely.
Yes, and because they are trapped in those doer roles, their compensation is capped, even though their experience is executive level.
That is just brutal.
It is the exact mechanism driving this frustration. The market is attempting to correct itself, but it's happening far too late and incredibly unevenly. And the realization that you are generating executive-level value for middle management recognition is profoundly demoralizing.
Which logically brings us to the psychological toll. Because when you combine a total lack of substantive impact with a glaring lack of recognition and reward, the obvious textbook diagnosis that gets thrown around is burnout.
Right, everybody talks about burnout.
Every corporate wellness seminar talks about it, but the author vigorously rejects that word for what this specific group of people is experiencing.
They do. They use a much more precise and, frankly, much heavier word to describe it.
Heartbreak.
Yeah.
I want to quote the author's peer directly here because hearing it in the first person is just staggering. This peer said, "I'm not burned out, I'm utterly heartbroken."
Wow. That distinction fundamentally changes how we understand the problem.
It really does.
Because burnout is a condition of capacity. It means your battery is at zero. You worked too many hours, you took on too many projects, and you are just physically and mentally exhausted.
And if you are burned out, rest fixes it. A vacation fixes it. Taking 2 weeks completely offline recharges the battery.
But heartbreak is a condition of alignment.
Tell me more about that.
Well, the author tells the story of a peer who worked 12-plus-hour days for 6 straight months, an absolute grueling grind.
Oh man, that's intense.
And at the end of it, they finally admitted out loud that the core direction of the company was wrong. Not their own effort. Their effort was heroic.
Right.
But the strategic vision of the leadership was flawed, which meant all of that heroic effort was essentially wasted.
But their passion was fully intact. They still cared deeply about the industry and the potential of the work.
Exactly.
But the alignment between their values and the company's decision-making was just completely shattered.
And you cannot cure heartbreak with a vacation.
No.
You can go to a beach for 2 weeks and your battery might recharge, but when you log back into your computer, your heart is still broken because the environment is still fundamentally misaligned with your desire to do meaningful work.
So the problem isn't inside the professional. The problem is the room they are standing in.
Precisely.
Fixing heartbreak in the workplace requires something entirely different from a wellness day. It requires adaptable leadership. It requires leaders who actually respond to what people need to be effective, who are willing to pivot a bad strategy. And the author notes that this capacity for adaptable, responsive leadership has severely eroded in many organizations that used to pride themselves on it.
Which ties directly back to the illusion of impact we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
If leaders are incentivized to maintain optics rather than embrace friction, they lose their adaptability.
Right.
And when leaders lose their adaptability, their most capable people experience heartbreak.
So you have these highly competent professionals. They care deeply. They have the energy. But they are heartbroken by the reality of the systems they're trying to hold up.
It's a tough spot to be in.
So what happens next? Once you realize you are dealing with a broken heart and not just an empty battery, what do you do?
Well,
Because this leads us to what I think is the most sobering revelation from all of these coffee shop conversations. It's a concept the author calls the math.
the quiet math. It is something almost everyone the author spoke to has been calculating on their own, entirely unprompted.
Yeah. They'll be in the middle of a conversation about something else entirely, maybe kids, maybe a mortgage, and they'll just bring it up.
Right.
They are looking at their lives, looking at their physical capacity, and realizing they have roughly 10 years left of real peak energy and earning capacity.
10 years. The author makes a point to clarify that this isn't some countdown to panic over. It's not a doomsday clock ticking down to retirement.
Sure.
But it acts as a powerful forcing function. When you quantify your remaining peak years, it takes a vague, foggy sense of like something's wrong with my career and sharpens it into a mandate for an actual decision.
Because if you only have 10 peak years left, you realize you simply cannot afford to waste 3 of them trying to convince a stubborn executive team to stop eating donuts on the treadmill.
Exactly. You have to move.
For the first time in your life, you suddenly start thinking in decades instead of individual fiscal years. You realize you need real career options that align with your values rather than just enduring another decade of the same grind purely because that's what you've always done.
It fundamentally rewires your risk tolerance.
Yeah.
The risk is no longer, well, what if I leave and the next job is hard?
Right.
The risk becomes, what if I stay and waste the last decade of my peak capacity?
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because this isn't just an individual realization happening in a vacuum. This is happening at a macro societal level.
Yes.
The bottleneck we talked about earlier, that delayed handoff of power, isn't just happening at one mid-sized consulting firm. It's everywhere. The generation ahead, the boomers, is holding on to leadership positions far past the historical norm.
The runway for Gen X got shorter, right as the generational handoff got slower.
And the author brings up a striking observation about U.S. presidents to illustrate the sheer societal scale of this bottleneck. Now, I want to be clear, we are looking at this purely as a societal data point.
Right, just a reflection of demographics and the delayed handoff of power.
Exactly. But the author points out that every U.S. president to date has been a boomer or older.
Wait, really?
Yes. Even if you debate the technical birth year cutoffs of the generations, the macro pattern holds. Boomers, all the way down.
That is wild.
Which raises a genuine, almost startling question. What if there is never a Gen X president leading the country?
This raises an important question beyond just politics, honestly. It's a profound thought experiment about societal structures. Not a delayed turn, no turn at all.
Exactly.
And the authors very clear in their reflection. They don't believe this demographic reality is a coincidence, and they don't believe it's unrelated to the heartbreak and the value gap we've been discussing in the corporate world.
It is the exact same math. The shorter runway, the slower handoff, it's just scaled up to society at large instead of an individual's career path.
Every generation before this one got its turn on something close to schedule, they got the baton.
And this might be the first generation that simply doesn't get the baton.
Which perfectly explains the anchor statistic we started with today. Why is Gen X the most pessimistic generation right now? Because they are doing the quiet math, they're looking at the delayed handoff, and they are realizing that the traditional map of success has just been rendered completely obsolete.
It's a heavy realization, really heavy. But as we bring this back to you, the listener, and the real value of exploring this deep dive, It's actually not meant to be depressing.
No, not at all.
In fact, the author talks about the incredible relief they found simply in naming the pattern out loud.
There is immense psychological power in validation. When you are sitting in your office, feeling like you can't make an impact, feeling underrecognized despite generating massive value, feeling heartbroken.
The default human assumption is usually something is wrong with me. I am failing to navigate this properly.
Exactly. I just need to work harder. I just need to read another leadership book. I just need to be more resilient.
But the author is explicitly telling you, no, this is not a personal failure showing up in a dozen separate lives by sheer coincidence.
It is one systemic story being told a dozen different ways by people who mostly don't even know each other.
And it's only coming to light now because people finally dropped the corporate bravado and had a moment of actual honesty.
So we'd encourage you to do your own quiet math. Look at your runway. Look at your environment.
Be incredibly honest with yourself. Are you experiencing burnout that a 2-week vacation can cure? Or are you experiencing heartbreak that requires a fundamental change in where and how you spend your peak energy?
The traditional handoff of power, wealth, and titles might be broken. The old map might be completely useless. But recognizing that is the first step toward figuring out what actually comes next.
And the author leaves us with this really powerful glimmer of momentum. They mention that the people who are willing to voice this stuff out loud,
The ones willing to say I'm heartbroken or the math isn't working.
yes, those people, they're usually the ones who figure out the next steps first, because they've stopped pretending the old map works.
They are the ones freeing up their mental energy to draw a new map entirely.
So I want to leave you with a thought to mull over, building on everything we've talked about today. If the traditional generational handoff is permanently broken and the old map of expected corporate rewards is gone,
What completely new definitions of legacy, of success, or of impact will this generation have to invent for their final decade of work?
right, if you aren't going to get the baton, what race are you going to run instead?
It is the defining question for anyone doing that quiet math today.
Definitely something to think about the next time you find yourself trying to convince someone to get off the treadmill and put down the donuts. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.